Me and Shaky are here in Castel San Pietro Veneto, and we're here to investigate some of the claims at the latter part of chapter 1 in Richard Rowe's book, Shakespeare Guide to Italy. Nice view, don't you think? Anyway, it seems to us that he makes a lot of assumptions. What's that you say, Shaky? Yeah, he says the only person allowed to make assumptions is the Virgin Mary.
When old Capulet, raging at his daughter, tells her that she'll be married at Peter's church, he's using a name not mentioned in any of the sources of the play. It seems to be an element that has been introduced entirely by the playwright. Why exactly would he do that? If you actually watch or listen to the scene, it does give a concreteness to the dialogue. He's not just referring to a one-off event, but to a place. And there's a great ranting rhythm to his line, "Now Vice of Peter's church and Peter too." But Richard Paul Rowe, in his book Beloved of Anti-Stratfordians Everywhere, is anxious to prove that the author is speaking with the special knowledge of someone who has actually travelled to Verona. In his words, "I had to believe it was not a fiction at a London writing table, certainly not after discovering the accuracy of the play's Sycamores, its old free town, and the uncanny ambience of the Verona neighbourhood which is reflected in the play." Problem is, of course, first that he hadn't even begun to prove the existence of Romeo's Sycamore Grove, that the importance of Villafranca can be inferred from the sources, in two of which old Capulet actually owns an estate in the region of Villafranca, and uncanny ambience. What the hell does that even mean? As he says himself, uncanny ambience is hardly proof of anything. Well, yeah, no, it isn't. If these are the reasons why he builds significance on the mention of St. Peter's Church, then he is building on wet quicksand. Besides which, this is not the only change made from the sources in Romeo and Juliet, often apparently for no particular reason. Benvolio, for example, is called Peter in the sources, and in the play the name Peter is used instead to refer to a Capulet servant. Mercutio, in the sources, seems at home with the Capulets, while in the play he's definitely aligned with the Montagues. The so-called balcony scene in the play involves several visitations in the sources, in one of which the marriage is consummated, rather uncomfortably I imagine, on a bench in the orchard. Some of these changes have obvious dramaturgical reasons, but by no means all of them. Who knows? Maybe the author read the sources without making notes and was happy to make stuff up when his memory failed him. So, back to Rowe. What he sets out to do is to find a St. Peter's Church that can be identified as the one mentioned in the play. Let me first point out that if you wanted to simply invent a church to fit in with the setting, then St. Peter would be a pretty good bet. Peter is a significant saint for Catholics because the idea of the apostolic succession and papal authority is based on Jesus' words, "I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." So it's a likely saint to conjure at a London writing table if the writer is trying to evoke a suitably Catholic atmosphere, and unsurprisingly there were several churches in Verona dedicated to St. Peter. But Rowe is in search of a detail that will prove that the writer had actually visited Verona. So he draws up a set of criteria for choosing which St. Peter's fits the bill. These all seem to be based on massive assumptions. It must be a Franciscan church, Rowe says, because it would be Friar Lawrence who would officiate at the wedding. Huge assumption. Friar Lawrence seems quite humble. The Capulets are not. They're clearly a family of substance. The groom in this marriage would be a count. Is it not more likely that some more senior priest would be asked to officiate? He then assumes that the wedding would take place at the bride's parish church. Well, maybe. But again, this is a society wedding. Is it not possible that the wedding would take place at the poshest church available, rather than the one where the family happens to hear Mass on a Sunday? And actually, the very fact that in the play, as Rowe is at pains to point out, the location of St. Peter's is mentioned several times, could well be interpreted as implying that this is not the normal place of family worship. Rowe lists the 3 St. Peter's that would have been extant at the time. San Pietro in Archivolto he dismisses because it was never a parish church. Okay, but this wedding is a big deal. I suspect that if Capulet wanted to hold a wedding there, he would have done so. San Pietro Martire is named after Verona's own homegrown saint. It seems to me that if you wanted a Veronese society wedding, that might be a suitable venue, but it's a Dominican church. The family, according to Rowe, would be looking for a Franciscan one. Well, I'm not sure Rowe has made this case, and is it not possible that old Capulet would be making a point when he tells his errant daughter that she will not be married in a church run by the order to which her over-indulgent confessor belongs? That would make sense of his repetitious insistence on the idea that this particular church would be the venue. So the church Rowe settles on is San Pietro in Carnario. His certainty is based on the fact that it's a Franciscan church and that it was a parish church at the time of the story. On this basis, he says, in the days of the story of Romeo and Juliet, the diocesan records reveal that this was indeed a parish church. It came under Franciscan jurisdiction and remained so for the next 600 years. I had indeed located St. Peter's Church. The process of this proof is based on the assumption that Friar Lawrence would officiate at the wedding, that it would be held in the local parish church, and that the family would be anxious for the church to be under the jurisdiction of the Franciscans. Clearly, these are all questionable assumptions. Rowe's evidence for this claim to have found St. Peter's Church is as flimsy as a wet negligee, and it ignores the possibility that the playwright has inserted the name of St. Peter's for an entirely different reason. As it happens, for example, there was a church of St. Peter's around half a mile from the Globe Theatre. It's the one labelled 15 on this map. It was called St. Peter's Westcheap, and no doubt many audience members streaming into the Globe would have passed it on their way to the theatre, a well-known church which was popular when state occasions were held because you could stand on the roof and watch the processions pass by. Now, Shakespeare frequently makes references to places in the locality of the theatre. When, in Twelfth Night, Antonio recommends the Elephant as a good place to stay, he is referring to a local inn. When Bardolph mentions the old place, the old Bull's Head Inn is cheap, he's talking about an actual pub, which is probably familiar to many audience members. When Justice Shallow in Henry IV Part 2 refers to the windmill in St. George's Fields, he's talking about an area in Southwark just across the river from the Globe. And if you look carefully, there is indeed a field mill marked on the map. So it seems to me not unlikely that the writer merely took the opportunity to amuse the audience by invoking a place that they would be familiar with. I'm not going to emulate Rowe and claim I have found the St. Peter's Church of the play, but it seems to me not unlikely that he's doing a bit of gentle audience pandering by bringing familiar bits of grubby London into this tale of fair Verona, and it's perfectly possible to postulate this without making a succession of dodgy assumptions about which priest the family would want and what order of monks they preferred. Anyhow, if you have been, thanks for listening.
So that's it then. I hope you enjoyed the video. Shaky, where exactly did you put St. Peter into Romeo and Juliet? You said it was easier to fit in with the verse than Santa Maria la Compostela.